To understand the current dispute, it helps to know their pasts, independence in the case of both, the colonialism in the case of British Honduras as it was known, or modern-day Belize. Guatemala declared independence from Spain in 1821, with soon after there being a civil war in which one side, the conservatives, wanted to join the First Mexican Empire, before this empire became a republic and renounced its colonial ambitions in 1823, allowing for self-determination. The Kingdom of Guatemala, which is present-day Central America, had been annexed by this empire in 1822. Upon being freed from both Spanish and Mexican imperialism, the Federal Republic of Central America was formed, including Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. The flag used for this likely having an influence in the subsequent flags, as they became their own countries. At one point, a unitary system was attempted under the Conservative Party, in contrast to the previously dominantly liberal one. This resulted in a civil war from 1826 to 1829, which ultimately reinstated liberal rule. This union started to break apart in 1837, with the cholera outbreak being blamed on the liberals in power in order to incite an Indian revolt, which contributed to the eventual complete dissolution, with the 1838 Assembly deciding that member states could do whatever they wanted at this point, as the central government had no real power. It was completely broken apart, though, in the very early 1840s, as member states exiled the president and dismissed the rest of the government in order to manage their own affairs as sovereign states with their respective governments. From 1841 on, though, it was independent. For Belize, there's a lot more history to it as far as discussing from imperialism and independence on. I will discuss its pre-colonial history briefly, as well as how it is relevant to relations with Spain and Guatemala that matter much more present day to the two countries involved in the dispute. In the early 1500s, there were still natives, in what I will simply call Belize for simplicity, and they had managed to fight off the Spanish, although as time progressed, many of these natives would die from disease. Or when the region was pacified by Spain in the 1600s, they were forcibly relocated to the Guatemalan highlands. Although being claimed by Spain through the Treaty of Tordesillas, following a peace signed by Britain and Spain in 1670, English Puritans moved into the area to make a living off logging, as they had been privateers and were now out of a job. In addition to this, the area became popular with pirates. It is understood that the first European settlers, though, were shipwrecked British sailors. This enabled the eventual formation of a permanent settlement. These settlers were recorded to have arrived in 1638, and it is understood that the natives were not hostile towards them, as they only really fought the Spanish. Over time, treaties between Spain and Britain were signed, allowing the Baymen, as these settlers were known, to log. A critical point regarding British control was on September 10, 1798, where, in battle against the Spanish, the Baymen defeated them, and Spain backed off from this point on. Skip to 1847 with the Caste War of Yucatan. This war, lasting until 1883, was between the Maya people against those of European descent due to economic and political control by the latter. Recognized by the UK in 1850 due to trade incentives, the Mayans managed to form a state in part of the Yucatan Peninsula. A second phase, though, was between 1884 and lasted until 1901, and Mexico reestablished control over the peninsula, and it was aided by Britain signing a treaty in 1893, recognizing Mexican control over the entire region due to, once again, trade incentives, this time being the opposite group. This treaty stabilized the border between Mexico and, at this point, British Honduras. Why do you suddenly throw in this British Honduras, a reasonable viewer might ask? British Honduras and modern Belize are the same in terms of territory. This war was brought up because of significant demographic change as a result of the movement of people caused by the war. Numerous Maya and refugees had fled into Belize to escape both Mexico and the conflict itself. Tensions arose from these refugees, inspiring settlers to seek entry into the British Empire to serve as a stabilizing force. In 1862, it became British Honduras, later becoming a crown colony in 1870. It shared the same governor as Jamaica until 1884, when it obtained its own. It struggled immensely and continually in terms of its finances due to falling sugar and mahogany prices, which were staple goods of its economy. British Honduras was allowed a new constitution in 1964, and thereby self-governance with a bicameral legislature. Later, its capital was moved from Belize City to Belpomon in 1971, changing its name to the present Belize in 1983. It was the last colony in the American mainland to become independent. Now that you have an understanding of their past, I'll begin to discuss the issues that beset Belize before, during, and after independence. The conflict began in the 1930s and the 1940s, citing the Huayc Hacienda Treaty of 1859, whose contents include Guatemala recognizing Britain's claim of what became British Honduras. In exchange, the British were to build a road from Guatemala City to the Atlantic coast near the settlement of Belize, this being Article 7 of said treaty. Having never held up its end, the Guatemalan government eventually declared it expired in 1946, saying it was a treaty of cession rather than a legitimate boundary treaty. This article was included by White as an attempt to increase trade between the parties, citing the Anglo-Spanish treaties of 1783 and 1786 as what allowed Britain to occupy this land, with this claim fading with Spanish colonialism in the region. Guatemala believed that Britain had no claim to the area, since they go on to argue that this violates the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty of 1850 between the United States and Britain, which delimited territorial claims. However, this completely ignores the Dallas-Clarendon Agreement, also between the United States and Britain. In Article 2, Section 1 of separate articles, Britain claims that Spanish treaties no means or extension give Guatemala the rights to the land, with Guatemala additionally never having controlled this land or had any sovereignty over it. And the aforementioned treaty specifically excluded British Honduras from the provisions of the other treaty. The British position continued by stating Belize was not involved in the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty at all, also stating that even if there had been provisions against it, it was already in de facto possession of the British Crown, concluding that it was most definitely a boundary treaty rather than any form of territorial cession. Guatemala had threatened to repudiate the treaty in 1884, but they did not do so until 1946. Even without a historical claim to the land, Britain still failed to ever build this road as dictated by the treaty, although a time frame, nor cost, or material was never specifically listed. It was a long time after such treaties that Guatemala took issue to British Honduras, namely starting in the 1930s but truly escalating in the 1940s. With 1945 in their constitution that they made that year, Guatemala stated that Belize was the 23rd province, based on the 18th century Anglo-Spanish treaty specifically, with one of the treaties reading word for word. Article 8. His Britannic Majesty shall cause to be demolished all the fortifications which his subjects shall have erected in the Bay of Honduras, and other places of the territory of Spain in that part of the world. 4 months after the ratification of the present treaty, and his Catholic Majesty shall not permit his Britannic Majesty's subjects or their workmen to be disturbed or molested under any presence whatsoever in the said places in their occupation of cutting, loading, and carrying away logwood. For this purpose they may build without hindrance and occupy without interruption the houses and magazines necessary for them, for their families and for their effects, and his Catholic Majesty assures to them by this article the full enjoyment of those advantages and powers of the Spanish coasts and territories as above stipulated immediately after the ratification of the present treaty. 1783 Treaty of Paris. One of the provisions is the evacuation of British settlements on the Spanish continent. However, this treaty was not effective in its original language, as it took the 1786 Convention of London for Britain to actively evacuate the Mosquito Coast, with Spain expanding the region in which British loggers could work with on the Yucatan Peninsula, giving them permission to cut hardwood such as mahogany in exchange for doing so. This language of evacuation was very similar to the 1763 Treaty of Paris, but nothing actually happened there with evacuation, because most of the people just stayed. The King of Great Britain shall restore to France the lands of Guadeloupe, of Marie-Galante, of Desserade, of Martinique, of Belize, and the fortresses of these islands shall be restored in the same condition that they were conquered by the British arms, provided that his Britannic Majesty's subjects who have settled the said islands, or those who shall have any commercial affairs to settle there or in place restored to France by the present treaty, shall have the liberty to sell their lands and their estates, to settle their affairs, to recover their debts, and to bring away their effects, as well as their persons, on board vessels, which they shall be permitted to send to the said islands and other places restored as above, and which shall serve for this use only without being restrained on account of their religion, or under any pretense whatsoever except of the debts, or of criminal prosecutions, and for this purpose the term of 18 months is allowed to his Britannic Majesty's subjects, to be computed from the day of the exchange of the ratifications of the present treaty. But as the liberty granted to his Britannic Majesty's subjects to bring away their persons and their effects and vessels of their nation may be liable to abuses if precautions were not taken to prevent them. It has been expressly agreed between his Britannic Majesty and his most Christian Majesty that the number of English vessels which have to leave to go to the said islands and places to restore to France shall be limited, as well as number of tons of each one, that they shall go in ballast, shall set sail at a fixed time, and shall make only one voyage, and all the effects belonging to the English being embarked at the same time. It has been further agreed that His Most Christian Majesty shall cause the necessary passports to be given to the said vessels, that for the greater security it shall be allowed to place 2 French clerks or guards in each of said vessels, which shall be visited in the landing place and ports of the said islands, and places restored to France, that the merchandise which shall be found herein shall be confiscated. As aforementioned, the Baymen dealt with the Spanish in significant defeat in 1798, Spanish no longer being able to control the region by any means. Another point against the British claim is that the Baymen never signed a treaty with the Spanish. The Treaty of Paris 1783, in short, as I quoted verbatim earlier, Britain relinquished all their forts in Belize and still allowed Spanish sovereignty over the soil. Spain likewise allowed the Baymen to continue logging and would become British Honduras. An issue, though, being the Baymen who controlled the region would later have to fight Spain off had no say in this treaty or negotiations. From this argument, it can be made that Spain had no authority, and it was illegitimate to claim that they did, as they have no effective sovereignty over this region, nor the people, and the people that did have sovereignty had no voice in the negotiations. Additionally, Spain has never recognized the claim by Guatemala of this area. Mexico used to claim part of it, but it was resolved after the aforementioned 1893 treaty, which established the border betwixt the two. As a final note regarding the road that was never built, since Belize never signed the treaty, they argue they have no responsibility to it. That ends part 1, what I describe as the Guatemalan Belizean border dispute in context of the claims set by Guatemala from 1945 until 1991 a new one was adopted before they had claimed all of Belize. This video established the legal context and reality of said claims. The next video will cover military action regarding sovereignty and will be focused on the last century to the date of the conflict, as in today when I'm making this shit.